Hello and welcome to another edition of the Osceola Seminole Sidelines. My name is Pat Burnham, and like every Tuesday, I am joined by Nick Carlisle, and of course, typically we are joined by Charles Fishbein, but Fish is on the water right now to be the best way.
He's in the sea.
He's in the sea. He is not available. He's otherwise occupied, but obviously no shortage of things to talk about surrounding the Florida State football program, and most everything these days, Nick, goes around the three changes that were made on the field by head coach Mike Norvell on Sunday evening when he fired Alex Atkins, Adam Fuller, and Ron Dugans. And I think probably if we're just going to dive right into it, first of all, before we get into that, your reaction to what happened on Sunday, because we have not been able to hear from you yet, but obviously. You had written an article, you're like the Grim Reaper. You had written an article about was consistency in the staff a good thing, or had it reached a point of complacency coming off really a great 2022 and 2023 seasons for Mike Norvell, and obviously did not manifest itself well this year, dropping to what is now 1-9. There had been a lot of conversation about whether should Mike make a change. I think we all knew the changes were coming. I think the timing of the changes is what everyone was kind of caught off guard by. But what were your thoughts when you got the text from me that there had been changes made?
Yeah, I was like, what? Right now? Because I didn't realize there was a press release that got sent out to everybody. But yeah, I know you and I and Salvapat were on the post-game show on Saturday night talking about this same very thing about, does the result on the field from that game kind of expedite some of these changes? And I was reluctant to say that they did. I felt like it wasn't in Mike's character to do it at this time. I felt like he was going to wait to the end of the season. But, now that he's done it, to be honest with you, I'm kind of glad that he did it. Obviously not to to both Atkins and Dugans, to Fuller, who lost their jobs. And obviously they're all great people. But the fact that Mike showed the willingness to do something and kind of put forth, kind of just kickstart the changes, kind of do the tough thing as opposed to being a nicer guy and giving the coaches the benefit of the rest of the season. I was kind of happy to see him make the changes. It gives him a head start in terms of not only talking to his commits, but future recruits and these guys who have 3 weeks before early signing day. And as I'm sure you've alluded to on the shows last night, he probably already has a decent idea of who those coordinators are going to be. So it gives him an earlier start in terms of trying to fix everything and turn everything around. And honestly, I think this is probably more of a positive that he decided to go and pull a trigger on these changes. And I remember watching the Monday presser and thinking, wow, Mike Norvell looks and sounds like Mike Norvell today. It felt like a tremendous weight had been lifted off his shoulders, finally doing something that he's probably been dreading doing for the last 4 or 5 weeks.
Yeah, and listen, I think there's a couple of things going on here, and some of them are obviously recruiting related. The bye week first of all, you're going through a historically bad season, right? The first time since 1974 that Florida State has lost 9 games in a season. So obviously there was going to be change, and Mike, obviously got the big contract extension. Alex got a big raise, so did Adam. And so I think, obviously that is one of the reasons that Mike's going to get a chance to rebuild this program, the timing of the contract extension, the length of it, the numbers. But going more directly into how this is going to impact recruiting, I think you got really lucky, as the fortune would have it, that you had an open date this week in this late in the season, because it allowed Mike a chance to make these changes or get a head start on them, because we don't think these are going to be the only ones. But,
Right.
I think with and I'm not sure how much I'm concerned about the actual early national signing day as I am to getting coaches in here to help retain and attract via the portal, because the portal is going to be such a big part of what Florida State's going to have to do to rebuild this offseason. And I think that Mike needs to have his coordinators in here. Hopefully, he's mentioned that December 1 would be ideal, but we don't know if that's going to happen. And that would be 3 days before National Signing Day. And I'm less concerned about that, but I think it buys him some time to get these coordinators announced, because you might be able to hold on to a recruit that you're in jeopardy of losing if you get the right guy and he's got a previous relationship or is able to sell his version of the offense or defense to a particular recruit. And then, of course, obviously it gives you a chance to, you would think, at least announce those guys, if not have them in place by December 8th when the portal opens, which is going to have a bigger impact. So I'm not a huge fan of the in-season firings, but we've also never seen a season like this at FSU. We've never seen a calendar like this, right? It's
Right.
been a early December signing period for high school kids, and obviously the portal is only 20 days and ends before the year ends. So I do think in retrospect that's an advantage for Mike to do this. And listen, I think there'll be more changes, but I think these two in particular. And listen, I think the other part of one of the reasons that Ron was let go is because, listen, they've lost every wide receiver commit. You're not getting it done on the recruiting trail, and obviously the wide receivers were struggling throughout the year and really throughout the last several years. Outside of the development of Johnny Wilson, you have not seen consistent development at that position. So I think that helps. Again, I'm against in-season firings, but again, this is a new calendar that these coaches are working with. And listen, let's face it, this will be the biggest offseason in Mike's tenure at Florida State. No matter what happens after this and what's happened before this, what he is going to do in this next 48-day period between November 12th and December 28th is going to set the table for him and for this program for some time to come. So, I think that I agree. I think that it helps. And listen, you can go into it and so let's talk about how it impacts recruiting, Nick, because the one concern that I think everyone has, because Alex was let go, is how does it affect Solomon Thomas, Mario Nash, and to a lesser extent, Danielle Pierre-Louis and Peyton Joseph, because I think those two guys are locked in. It's the other two, the two with the high-end potential, in my opinion. And both of them remain committed, but their reaction was one that leaves you a little bit concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, Atkins, despite the product on the field, is a guy that was very personable and I think very easy to get along with from a recruiting perspective. These kids really, really liked Atkins, the person, the coach. I think you saw the word family used quite frequently in almost I think probably all of their posts, probably except for Solomon. But yeah, obviously Solomon is the highest rated player that you have remaining in your 2025 class. You would want to hold on to him as best as you can, but you got to understand that the relationship with Atkins was very strong. And now that this has happened, there is going to be some sharks that smell blood in the water that are going to try and get in here late, try to get him to flip. I know Miami is probably one of those schools that are licking their chops most fervently right now. There are some others like LSU, possibly Georgia, that may try and get involved here, but you're definitely worried about that. Out of all of them, I wouldn't necessarily say that DPL, Daniel Pierre-Louis, is necessarily a lock. He does have a visit coming up to Florida, I think on the 23rd or the 16th or the 23rd. He does have a visit there scheduled last week. So really it comes down to what does that Florida coaching staff pitch to him if he does make it on campus there. But everybody else, I feel good about Joseph. There's more than just his commitment that would entice him to stay here. And obviously Nash being from far away, I'd be interested to see if Ole Miss starts poking around again, but I think he's probably pretty solid as well. But obviously, as I said, all of them had really good relationship with Atkins. I'm sure they're probably feeling a little bit hurt. But as Solomon Thomas said, this is a business. You had to kind of imagine that this was coming with the team being 1-9, the offensive line looking as it has.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And listen, I just wonder, Solomon's a very interesting kid. He's kind of quiet until he's not.
Yes. I was a little bit worried by his response last night. The first tweet, because if for those in the chat that didn't see it, he said, y'all messed up firing my coach. And I was like, oh, well, I wasn't expecting quite that response, to which he followed up with like 15 or 20 minutes later. But it's a business. I understand it's a business. Go Noles. I think if you ain't talking business, I don't want to talk. So I'm like, that sounds a little bit more like Solomon.
Yeah, I just wonder because even that's cryptic, right? Call me if you want to.
It is,
because my take on that was, okay, cool. He understands that football is a business, and he's made some of what he has done is made. Listen, these guys are all making business decisions one way or the other. I mean, I'm not going to say that who is coaching and where they're going and the helmet they put on is not playing a factor into it, but we do understand that for the high profile recruits, particularly the best recruits in the nation, NIL is a bigger part of it for a 5-star than it is for a 3-star, right? I mean, let's
sure, be honest. Yeah. So, and if you want to look at it this way, if with him saying, I understand it's business, and if you're not talking business, I don't want to talk, you got to understand that there are plenty of other programs that are willing to talk business with Solomon Thomas with NIL and trying to pull him away from this program. And there's certainly potential for him to say, look, I found a better deal elsewhere. And say, hey, it's not personal, Florida State. Obviously, I love y'all, but it's business. So there is potential if he wants to kind of flip that back. Yeah. I'm not sold that he will, but honestly, at this point, Florida State fans should not be surprised.
Well, yeah, I just think I guess my point was it was unclear whether he was saying I'm open for business or it's business, because that's what happens in football. And I'm moving straight forward. No issue with Florida State. I've reached out to Solomon. I've not heard back from him. So, and I don't think that'll change, to be quite honest with you. I think that he will stay mostly silent. But I texted you guys yesterday. I've got some well-connected sources within college football, and they believe that Alex Atkins has already been offered a couple of jobs as an analyst, and I'm sure Alex would prefer to be on the field. And so my thought process was, and listen, again, I'm just telling you what I was told by sources. I just wonder if some of this being offered a job as an analyst so quickly could be tied into a Solomon. Hey, if we get Alex on staff, maybe we got a shot at flipping Solomon, that type of thing. And the same thing with Mario, because as I said, he says I'm committed for now. So the fact that he put a tense on it makes me believe that maybe he's going to at least listen. And listen, you can't. It's just like we talked about Tramel Jones, and we'll talk more about that. Because, you can't blame these kids with what's going on for keeping their eyes open. And it's gotten to the extent where we have seen Florida State circle back to some guys like Javion Boggs and Darryll Desir and Mandrell Desir, the brothers who have been all three of those kids were at one time committed to UCF. And so is Javon. At least Javon still is. So, I think it's fair that these kids do that, and I think that's one of the reasons that Mike went ahead. And I mean, besides the fact that fans wanted heads to roll, I think the other part of this, and I don't know whether Mike fired him because of the pressure or for the calendar. It might have been a little bit of both, right? So I do think that. I think I almost lost my train of thought there, but anyway, so you can understand why he did it, and then if you get an offensive line coach or offensive coordinator named before National Signing Day, or at least can say, hey, this offensive line coach is coming in, you need to look at his resume before you make a decision to flip from Florida State. But yeah, I can certainly see why these kids are having some second thoughts. And
the other thing is, and I can't remember if it was Bob or Kurt that brought this up in our staff there. The other thing is that Alex Atkins has a show cause order. So wherever he goes, that program is going to have to explain to committee or to whoever why they want to hire him. Now, I'm not saying that's an immovable object and a permanent roadblock, but to your point about, the interest in Atkins almost immediately being linked to some of the recruits that Florida State still has on the board, I think that definitely plays a part of it. But it's for the benefit of Florida State, it might not be that simple. And again, not an immovable object, but it's certainly a hurdle that any program hoping to poach Florida State via Atkins going onto their staff are going to have to overcome. But yeah, I absolutely agree with you.
I wonder if just thinking out loud here, and I hope I don't set off alarms to anybody listening, but I wonder if he can go somewhere as a volunteer assistant coach. He's going to make over $3 million from Florida State. Does that get rid of the show clause? Because FSU has Ernie Sims is not a show clause guy, guy, but he is a volunteer assistant that's coaching on the field. Right. I wonder if Alex can do that. Now, I think Alex has always wanted to go to the NFL at some point in his career, and I think this may be the impetus that gets that done. So we'll see, but I just wonder if he volunteered somewhere, do they have to give a show cause statement at that point? So,
well, that's a good question.
We'll see.
I mean, because also, Alex has, I don't know how old. Do you know how old his daughter is? It's very, very young. I know him and his wife.
I think
one or two. Year or two. So, yeah. I mean, is there potential? I have no knowledge of this whatsoever, and I'm speculating, but maybe he's been here for 4 or 5 years. Maybe he wants to take the $3 million that Florida State's going to be paying over how many years, and with the show cause order, maybe he just wants to spend some time off the field with his family and take a lesser position. So, or he could be a workaholic and go to the NFL. I don't know, but to your point earlier, I think the longer and the more that we kind of settle into these coaching changes, the more I feel like this was 100% the right decision to do it now, as opposed to waiting to the end of the season. I know how I felt on Saturday, but sometimes you just got to rip off the Band-Aid. The more you talk about it, the more positives you see from Mike being able to set up what he wants to set up, have open communication with not only his 2025 and 2026 commits, but some of the guys that they're still after, to say, okay, this is what my plan tentatively is. Here's everything that I know, and just kind of lay everything on the table in hopes of hanging on to some of these kids and staying in the race for others that could be potentially making decisions soon.
Yeah, and I think that probably, I know, at least going back 48 hours later, looking at it myself, I was probably short-sighted in not taking the portal calendar into account on when Mike made these changes, and particularly with having an off week to make them and give the team time to kind of get back on its feet, because you don't see a lot of in-season firings at Florida State.
No.
So I do think in retrospect the timing makes it. I think it helps Mike. I hate it for the other guys, because even when you listen, I've already said, when you go 1-9, everybody's on the potentially on the chopping block. And like I said before, if Mike had Billy Napier's contract, we might be having a whole nother conversation 3 weeks from now, but that's not the case. So anyway, those 23 wins over the previous 2 years obviously have bought him some goodwill, and he has going back. What I find fascinating is, all these fans. This is off the recruiting point. We'll get back on the recruiting, but all these, their outrage on Twitter and Facebook and wanting change. Now that he's given people, he served up 3 people to the masses, but half the fan base is still mad. I mean, you read our message boards. You've seen them. Why is it?
It's not only 1-9, but it's a bad 1-9. Like it is a bad, horrible, terrible, no good, not very fun 1-9.
But I'm just saying, you can't appease everybody. You've appeased half the people, because now everybody wants either the rest of the staff fired or Mike's got to get fired. And listen, when they gave Mike the option, and I hope everybody does realize this, short of something unseeable happening at Charleston Southern, Mike, this was a sure indication that Mike is coming back, because you don't fire those guys if you're not coming back. So everybody just needs to slow their roll on that. And I understand their frustration because 1-9. But anyway, I like in retrospect, as we were talking about, I do like the timing of the changes because of the calendar and because of those two positions, particularly on offense and offensive line, where if you get the right guy in here, you might be able to get in on some recruits. Not only you salvage the class, but also get in on some big names in the portal, which they're going to need some big names in the portal. So let's go to Nathan's got a couple questions. Is it about the roster, Jimmy's and Joe's, not X's and O's? My point being, is coaching the issue, or is it the evaluation? I think it's a little bit of both. Listen, I think Florida State, particularly on defense, has some talented players. They're not playing up to their potential. That's one of the reasons. In fact, they're playing below their potential, and that's not just Adams' fault. He's ultimately responsible for that because he was the defensive coordinator. But I think it's a little bit of both. I don't think it's any one thing that has started this. I think a avalanche of things that happened to this program to go from 13-1 to 1-9. Certainly, there are spots, particularly wide receiver, offensive line, linebacker, where it is more about the Jimmies and the Joes, not the X's and O's. But when you don't have the Jimmies and Joes, the X's and O's look bad, right? So I think it's a combination of things. I think there have been some missed evaluations. I think coaching is part of the issue. On defense, Nathan, in my opinion, when you're playing defense is as much about attitude as it is any one thing. Attitude and effort. Mark Salva and I talk about this all the time. FSU was not playing with the attitude that has become synonymous with its defense, going back to when Mickey Andrews took over the defense in 1984, and they played some good defense when Gene McDowell was here and other coaches before that, and have since. But I do think that it's a little bit of everything. I don't think players are being coached up to their potential. That's just not on Adam and Alex. Obviously, Ron is gone for that very reason, and I think there'll be some other guys. But yes, my dad was coach at Florida State for 10 years. I think he helped make Paul McGowan. Now, Paul McGowan was a good, tough, hard-nosed football player, but I think my father helped him become as good as he could be, and he won the Buckus. He also coached Marvin Jones, and I think, as he will tell you, once I knew what kind of player Marvin was, I stayed out of his way. He made me a better coach. So I think both things can work together, but certainly the better players you have, the better coaches you're going to be, particularly if you can get them to do what you're asking them to do and commit and play hard. But on defense, I think it's more about attitude and effort. So I think it's a little bit of both. What about you, Nick?
Yeah, it's a mixed bag. They're in tandem with one another. Whatever the difference was between the end of last season and the start of this season, and I'm not just talking the loss of personnel, but I think these coaches really struggle to reach the players on this team for whatever reason. And sure, there was some missed evaluations, but on the other end of the spectrum, and like if you are consistently putting a player that has a specific skill set and putting them in a disadvantageous position, things like putting Omar Graham or Blake Nicholson, who Blake Nicholson's a great linebacker, a great coverage linebacker rather, and constantly putting him on a fast, speedy slot receiver and, watching him get dot up. It's like, okay, well, that's your X's and O's and your coaching decisions. And it doesn't matter how much talent the kid has, right?
Yep.
It's a little bit of a mix of both. I think everybody's complacent in this. Everybody has a little bit of fault in it. I absolutely 100% agree with what you're saying about attitude being a huge problem with this defense, and that falls on the coaches to be able to get these kids ready to play. And they haven't consistently done that, no matter how talented they have been, because Pat, you watch the press conferences of the opposing coach every single week.
Yep.
How many times, despite Florida State's record, has a coach on the opposing team come on the air or on for a press conference and say, this team is really, really talented? And they I'm sure they don't watch everybody else's press conferences and try to regurgitate the same thing. Like, this team has talent. So it falls then on the coaches to be able to reach their kids mentally and allow them to play physical football. And they just weren't doing that. But again, it's a bit of a mixed bag. There were definitely some missed evaluations too.
I think you need, we were talking about this, about when Mike makes these coaching replacements. You want to be a better recruiter or coach? I want him to be both, but I think it takes a little bit of both. I think you got to have a couple of great X and O guys on each side of the ball that can help make each other better, because a coordinator needs somebody that's going to go against the grain every now and then and say, Coach, I think we should do this. You don't want just 4 recruiters and a defensive coordinator, or 4 recruiters and an offensive coordinator. You want some guys that can do both. And listen, there are coaches, and Art Fish and I had this argument last night on the show. I've worked in college football, inside college football, on a staff for 11 years. We had guys on the staff that could do both. They could coach and recruit. Now, we had some guys that were better at coaching. We had some guys that are better at recruiting, but there was a middle area where you could have both. So, yeah, I think it's a little bit of both, but no doubt, Nathan, the fact that better football players, I think my story about McGowan and Jones kind of sum it up. That's the way I feel. One of them was going to make my dad a better coach. My dad was going to make one of those players a better player. And I think you see that with just about, Deion Sanders made Mickey Andrews a great coach. He made Stan Shiver and Bill Reagan's great players. Alley Cat. You can go on and on and on. Kyler Hall, James Colsey, which I believe was a walk-on at Florida State, ended up being a really good corner for Florida State. So I think it works both ways. All right, we got another question. So we were talking about Mike and the firing. What is the win-loss bar next year for Mike? Is it 6? Can't believe I'm asking this question. You know what? We talked a little bit about this, because I said last night on our show that I think that I believe that, after this season, it'll probably end up being 2-10 or 3-9, but let's just say it's 2-10. I think that I think Mike and Jerry's argument was they still owe him $49 million, no matter how bad next year goes or how good it goes. I said I think I might revise my statement. I said last night, I thought the number was 8. I think it's probably bowl game. I do, so I think you're probably right, Nathan. 6 or 7, show that this is going in the right direction. Play some young guys that give you some reason to be excited about 2026. But I think I do think there is a number. I think they got to get to a bowl. And listen, you should be able to get to a bowl in the ACC year in and year out if you're FSU. And I believe that they, as bad as this team is, if they had been coached up to their ability, they would have at least gotten to a bowl. What do you think, Nick?
I'm looking at the schedule for next year right now.
Don't look at the opener.
What's that?
Don't look at the season opener.
I'm not even taking that into equation, to be honest with you. Oh, that's going to be a rough game. Who knows? They could surprise us. I don't want to forecast or too doom and gloom. Looking at this schedule, East Texas A&M. I don't even want to trigger you to have you go on your FCS rant, Pat. East Texas A&M. So it's then Kent State, Florida, Clemson, Miami. Yeah. Pitt, which is having a good year this year. Virginia Tech, Wake Forest, NC State, Stanford, Virginia. You're going to get Clemson, obviously, in Miami, but that's not a really difficult schedule on paper. Now, obviously, it depends on what kind of team. That's what we said this year, exactly. You take a look. There's no at Notre Dame. There's no North Carolina, which I know North Carolina was in just as much of a tailspin as Florida State was at one point. But that's typically speaking of kind of above the average in terms of the ACC. I would say 7 to 8 wins with this schedule. And obviously that's up for revision depending on how the next month and a half to 2 months goes. Obviously, that allows us to cheat a little bit. But taking a look at the schedule, that's apart from the opener at Alabama, that's not incredibly difficult to where Florida State should be missing a bowl game.
Yeah.
I mean, if Mike goes 5-7, I mean, 6-6, I would there. The seat gets real hot then. And to Jerry's point, you're still owing him a boatload of money there. But looking at the schedule, Pat, I think 7 to 8 wins is probably where you should fall, given the talent that you're losing this year and the talent that you would need to acquire and how little numerically this recruiting class is.
Yeah, and we're as a staff, Nathan, we're split on it. I think it could be as short as one. They give him one more year to get it turned around, meaning next year. Jerry and Kurt seem to go a minimum of 2, unless next year is just a awful repeat of this year. So we'll see. Listen, you got a lot of leeway with last year and the year before that, and maybe Florida State's administrators and the power brokers, listen, they know Mike better than we do. They're closer to the program than we are as far as the ins and outs on a daily basis. And maybe, everybody talks about maybe Mike wanted to make some of these changes previous to the last year or two, but he couldn't because of the success on the field and chose not to. I know before the 2022 season, for sure that he was thinking about making at least one coaching change and ultimately did not do that because he was going to interview somebody that I worked with at USF with Skip Holtz, and that guy ended up not coming in because Mike changed his mind. So, we'll see. But, I think it's going to be fascinating. Everybody's going to be paying attention to it, that's for sure. And it almost feels like since Mike started to make the changes, Nick, that this season's – I feel like it's over, I mean –
it's hard to believe that there's still a couple more weeks to go. It feels like it.
Yeah, no game this weekend, and then, he started to make changes. But, how the offensive line – got a question on the offensive line from Griff. How could this offensive line become this bad that fast after being so good the last couple of years? I'm going to give you a 2-word answer. And Mark Salva and I have talked about it. Jordan Travis. Jordan Travis protected that offensive line. If you go back and read one of our preseason articles, my question, I'm going to try to find it because I was writing about it earlier today. My specific question on the offensive line coming into this season was I wanted to see how they could protect the passer with a quarterback not as athletic and dynamic as Jordan Travis. And as it turns out, that has been one of the pitfalls for this football team. It cannot protect the passer if his name is not Jordan Travis. And that's one of the reasons Alex Atkins is not here. I can remember when they named FSU was named as a finalist for the Joe Moore Award. Mark Salva and I both played offensive line in college, and Mark coached offensive line at a very high level, was a GA at Florida State in South Carolina, and Mark hardly ever calls me about anything. He knows when we're doing the shows, and we'll text a little bit. And he goes, "Can you believe Florida State's offensive line got nominated for the Joe Moore Award?" I said, "No." When you look at who else did, they're kind of the outlier, and I think the reason that they have looked so good is because Jordan Travis could buy time in the pocket. When you looked at what happened to the offense when Jordan Travis got hurt last year, and everybody, you played against Louisville and Florida with everybody except Jordan Travis, right? There were no opt-outs before that. Now, there might have been a couple of guys that were hurt, but you see what happened to that offense when Jordan Travis was gone. They fell off the cliff. And they continued following this year. So I think there were some. I think if you watch the games close enough, you saw some of that even last year. But I think that's the answer to the question. Nick, what do you think?
Yeah, I would have to agree. What my question would be to you is how do you think that the consistent shuffling of offensive line aided to this? Because you know that like the offensive line is a unit that is communicating and working as one. I'm not saying that they couldn't do it, but I feel like at least part of it is when they started consistently shifting offensive linemen last year too. drop off. There was starting to be a little bit of a drop off.
Well, I will say this: I don't understand like. There's too much. Of course, I sound like an old man, which I am, but there's way too much substitute and there's way too much specialization, right, across college football. But particularly on the offensive line, I've never been a fan of rolling 7 or 8 guys in there. I think that, there's a reason somebody's a starter and there's a reason somebody's not a starter.
Right.
So, I think part of this is done today to try to keep people fresh. I don't buy that as much as I do you're trying to placate players, make sure they get playing time. But, listen, Mike and Alex for the previous 4 years have sold the fact that rolling in 7, 8 guys is something they've always done. And then all of a sudden this year when they're losing, we're rotating offensive linemen in and out of the ball game. Well, that's what you've always done. So I think it comes across as I agree with the fact that you should play your starting 5 because they're your starters for a reason as much as you can. I do believe that there probably are some communication issues from time to time, but when you've got Maurice Smith, who's a senior, Darius Washington on the left tackle, and Jeremiah Byers at right tackle, who've all been in the system multiple years, they should be able to communicate with 2 young guards. The center should be able to tell everybody. First of all, the center should be able to tell everybody what they're supposed to do. But I think part of it was that they were overvalued. I think one of the reasons we thought too much of the offensive line is because they had Jordan Travis around them for the previous 3 years and not having this year. And listen, they did. You didn't have a blocker tight end that was an outstanding blocker in the run game, and I think that has hurt the offense some as well,
especially on the edge too with the wide receivers. I mean, Keon and Johnny were really, really good at those things, and not to say that guys like Hakeem can't do it, but it's certainly harder for 5'9", 5'10" Ja'Kai Douglas. I'll say that.
Yeah, and then of course we got one more question. Why are our linebackers so bad? I'm not trying to be negative. I love this program. I think the linebackers are bad. Well, listen, I think you're totally wrong. They do not have the type of linebackers that we're used to seeing at Florida State. And I also think that, listen, when you go, they have a hard time getting off blocks at the line of scrimmage. That's one of the reasons people, it's not just the linebackers, defensive tackles aren't getting off blocks. The ends aren't setting the edge, and, the runs are getting back to the safeties. But I think one of the reasons they look so bad is how they play that particular play, and you don't have a linebacker as the alley player. He's a part of the wall, and you got to get off a block if it goes to decide the gap that you're responsible for, and they're just not doing that. And then of course I think they need more speed at linebacker. You saw that all year, Nick, where they're getting beat by running backs and tight ends.
Yeah. I think Cam Riley's probably your fastest linebacker, and that's shocking to say about a kid that's 6'4", 6'5". That he's the only one that has really showed that sideline to sideline speed that I think, especially to low Chad, maybe not so much Tatum, who had more central middle of gap responsibilities. But I think I'm curious to see what Randy Shannon does in the next 2 weeks. I don't think there's going to be like any ginormous scheme changes or anything, but with him kind of taking full control of everything, that's his position group. I wonder if there's going to be any potential uptick, but of course you can't, there's no coaching that can fix not getting off of blocks and filling gap responsibilities and run fits. So
I wonder if you might see I wonder if you might see a more attacking style of defense up front, meaning not playing read technique. Now, I don't know how much of the disruptive base calls they have, but I do know, obviously, with my brother having coached defensive tackles and defensive ends for Randy at UCF for 3 years, that they were a little bit more attacking style with their defensive front, trying to disrupt the offense, whether it was by reestablishing the line of scrimmage. And that's what I grew up around. I hope we see more of that. I think you might see a little. I don't know. Randy likes man to man too, so we'll see. It'll be interesting to see if you see him play with any kind of energy that's different. Does Randy kind of simplify things? and who does Randy play? Who does Randy make some personnel changes?
He doesn't have a lot of options because everybody's hurt.
Well, that's true. That's true.
He's got Murphy, Graham, Nicholson, and Riley.
I'm just talking about across the board on defense.
Oh, you're talking across the board.
Yeah. That you say, hey, we're sitting so and so down because he's not tackling well, and that's your number one job on the defense is to get the ball carrier down. You can forget everything else.
Yeah.
So anyway, it'll be interesting to see what he does there. And Mike kind of indicated that he wanted Randy to kind of do his thing, right? Do your thing with the defense. And, listen, I do know this. I know a lot of people aren't fans of the way Randy recruits, but I do know a lot of people in football, and you may not be always, he's kind of more of a teacher on the practice field. He's not very demonstrative. He's not a big yeller or anything like that. But I do know this. Randy knows an awful lot of football. I've talked to various people, including I have family members that have been in meeting rooms with him. As far as just his football IQ, he has seen a bunch, and he does have a little bit of a different philosophy than Fuller and a little different approach. And listen, we're all going to come out of this Charleston Southern game and have an overreaction to what we see because it's Charleston Southern. But, listen, we'll see maybe against Florida. And listen, I know that I know that, I know Jerry wanted to put Randy on as a potential replacement to Adam as a defensive coordinator. You hear different things, but could this be a 3-week tryout? Obviously Mike has coached against Randy. They played in multiple games against each other at Memphis and UCF, including one or two championship games. I cannot remember. I think maybe 2 AAC championship games, but certainly one. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I don't expect it to happen because I'm not sure that. Although Mike said, because you're going to like some of the decisions I'm making. I don't know if he was not referencing necessarily coaching changes, but because you're going to agree with some of the decisions I'm making, you're not going to agree with others, and that's just part of it. But yeah, so I think everyone is interested to see if anything does change, and is Randy a legitimate candidate for?
Yeah, I guess you could treat it as a 2-3 week tryout, but my personal opinion, I have a hard time seeing him staying on staff.
When Jerry said that, my thought was, well, if he's if he was going to be a legitimate candidate for that, wouldn't you make the change at defensive coordinator earlier?
Yeah,
I
would agree with that. Yeah. I would agree.
Yeah, so that's the only reason I don't think it's likely to happen. And listen, now a new defensive coordinator may come in and say, I want to keep Randy.
Sure.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens there. But yeah, so interesting. All right, so let's jump back to recruiting because we got off on questions and a tangent. All right, so I've tried to track down Carter Smith, the quarterback from Vero Beach. I've heard that he's coming in on an official visit on November 30th. I cannot confirm that. There is at least another site reporting it, Nick. I don't know if you've read that. I don't subscribe to the other services, so I don't know what they're saying.
I didn't know. I knew that there was a lot of interest just in talking to people, not necessarily with other sites, that there is interest with Carter and Florida State. Like there is real interest there, especially with what's happening with Tramel Jones. Will he? Won't he? Is Florida State going to take multiple quarterbacks? But the point is that there's interest there between the two parties. I didn't know that an official visit had been set up. If that ends up being the case, that's not necessarily shocking to me. He is going to be in Wisconsin this weekend. So if he comes out of that visit to Wisconsin this weekend, not committed, then I obviously you feel a lot better about him showing up on campus and Florida State having a shot to bring him into the fold really late in the cycle.
Now, I know he's a great baseball player. Do you know if he plans to play baseball in college, Nick? I think that would give Florida State.
But if he comes on campus, I'll ask him.
Yeah, I think that would give Florida State an advantage over Wisconsin. We'll see. like I said, the kid has not been on campus, I don't think, since the 2023 calendar year.
It's been a long time. I think he came for a junior day visit in January or something like that. It's been a long time. And, obviously he hasn't had much of a reason to come back around because he's been so loyally committed to Michigan. But when Michigan starts throwing a bad Bryce Underwood.
And Florida State's been loyal to Tramel Jones, too.
Yeah.
They only brought in one quarterback for official visits, and that was the kid, one other quarterback, I should say, for official visits. So, But now Fish says that there's mutual interest from Carter Smith to Florida State and Florida State to Carter Smith, and that the kid has grown up a fan of Florida State. So you got to hope that would help. Now, does that exasperate things with Tramel, who is already, as we know, or as we believe, based on what we've been told, that he is at least keeping an open mind until the quarterback coach situation is resolved, whether it's Tony or somebody else, Tony Tokarts, or offensive coordinator has been resolved. If they hire somebody's offense that he likes to play in, does he stay? If Tony's retained, does he stay committed to the class? Because I do believe he's got a good relationship with Tony Tokar, so we'll see how that works out. But
Tramel's been on record before, and this is when he first recruited so early to Florida, or committed so early to Florida State back in April of 2023. He's been on record saying that he doesn't mind competition. Now, what he says and what he actually feels, obviously, who knows if he has changed his feelings on that. Obviously, Florida State has been very, very careful about how they approach and talk to other quarterbacks not named Tramel Jones. Obviously, that whole Antoine Hill saga during the summer was a little bit interesting in terms of whether Florida State was going to try and either bring Hill in on a visit or just keep him warm for a while. Yeah, I don't know. What he said a long time ago may not be the way that he feels now. So he may be open to competition, and he may be perfectly fine with having Carter join the class and compete with him, especially, we don't know what's going to happen to either Brock or Luke. And obviously it's not necessarily a conversation we need to get into, but I guess anything's is possible. Like the catalyst and the variable, I guess, is who Mike has coming in as the offensive coordinator and what happens to Tokars.
And then what happens to all three of them if he brings in a portal quarterback?
Do you dare? I saw Thomas Castellanos left the team briefly, or he's going to leave Boston College for a week. But I don't know.
I can tell you what that means. He's not coming back to Boston College,
right? He did get benched, I think, though. I haven't been following too much of Boston College since obviously they came into town. So I don't know if he's having a disastrous season under Bill O'Brien, or if he's just not playing that great, or if he's better.
A combination. Listen, Bill's hard to play for, and Thomas has made some baffling decisions with the football.
So he'd be perfect here. No, I mean, hey, if you want to stoke the fire a little bit, he might look good in the go-go offense. You want to stoke the fire a little bit.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see, because he's going to have some, the one good thing that Florida State, if that he were to enter the portal, is he's got some Jordan Travis-like athleticism.
I'm sure our boards would be all over that.
Now they
love their Jordan Travis copycats.
He might drive Mike crazy with his the way he takes chances, and he's definitely run first, throw second. So it'll be interesting to see. But listen, I think if he goes in the portal, which I'm assuming he's going to do after that announcement today that he had taken a couple of days off, Bill O'Brien does not strike me as a guy who's going to say, okay, go clear your head. Maybe he is. Maybe he is. Hopefully, as we all get older, we all get wiser and more patient, although it's a struggle for me at times. Anyway, so that'd be interesting to see. But so there's not been a peep about Tramel in over a week. You talked to him when he was here. Everything was positive, and then we get the flip prediction from another site, and then we dig into it, and we have one person that tells us we should be really worried about it, than the other who's a little bit closer to the situation and a non-biased. non-biased form says that, hey, he's not going to do anything until Mike makes a decision on some of these
The
coaching
truth
hires.
usually lies in the middle.
Yeah. So he right now he is committed to Florida State, and we think Carter Smith, based on at least reports that we're seeing, could be on campus for November 30th official visit. He won't be alone that weekend. Nick, I know we've got several guys that are coming in. Who are they, and what do we need to know?
Yeah, so reports are that Florida State is expecting Ole Miss defensive end commit Tylon Lee to show up on November the 30th. Also, USF commit Sean Poray is also expected to be on campus. Now, this official visit has been set for a couple of weeks now. Obviously, Poray was offered by Atkins at a summer camp here over the summer. So I given that Atkins is not here anymore, I don't want to assume that visit might not happen, but logically you have to think that visit may not take place given kind of the relationship that he's there or that was there. And so, yeah, I've obviously reached out to Sean. You have too, trying to get his feelings on things, but we'll have to see if he makes it.
Yeah. I think, I think Sean is kind of a slighter guy for an offensive lineman. So I think he is probably a down the board guy for Florida State. And, maybe they are holding off to see if they hold on to these four. I also think you can take a chance on a fifth one and see if you can get him here and develop. Now, a lot of people are going to say let him go somewhere else and re-recruit him once he's developed. But I do like he's got outstanding feet. I do remember that from his camp appearance. I mean, he was really, really good in camp that day. He's just not a huge kid. He's not probably as muscular as Bryson Estes, but he's kind of reminds me of Bryson. You put Bryson next to all those other offensive linemen, Bryson looks small compared to your Julian Armellas and TJ Fergusons and Jeremiah Byers. He's not really a small human being, but in relation he is. And then listen, Tylen Coleman, obviously, you got one defensive lineman committed to this class, so you'd probably like to get another. Now, the good news with Tylen, he's a junior college guy. So he's going to be a little bit more physically developed, and they've got to have somebody that can come in here and take over because, we don't know whether Darryll Jackson or Josh Farmer will be back next year. I think they both had pro aspirations coming into this season. I think those took a little bit of a hit. They've both been playing better lately, but is it good enough where their pro contract would outweigh what they could get either from Florida State in NIL money or somewhere else in NIL money? So we'll see there. And then the guy that kind of intrigues me, and we've talked about him, Jordan Scott. What do we know about him?
So Jordan Scott, another one of these JUCO players that Florida State has been taking a look at to kind of round out this class. He's basically a carbon copy of the body type of Johnny Wilson, 6'7", 215. He committed to Arizona State over the weekend, but our understanding is that he is going to make his Florida State official visit on the 23rd. So that's not this weekend, but that's going to be the next weekend. I know Fish has more specific intel on that. You should go and check on our boards. He posted his Fish bits from today. So if you're looking to find a little bit more about that and some of the other prospects that we're talking about on the show today, you can do so. But yeah, so Jordan Scott, obviously, I think they see Johnny in him. Hopefully he's got a little bit better hands than Johnny does, but so I had wondered if he, I had wondered, Pat, if he had committed to Arizona State because Dugans was no longer at the program. I think it happened at the same day. So that's something that piques my interest a little bit, but obviously reports say that he's going to make his official visit here.
I think it also has something to do with who's recruiting him at Arizona State, and that's Hines Ward, who I've worked with Hines. We worked together in the Alliance of American Football, and Hines is a great guy. He was vice president of player personnel or something for the league. I can't remember exactly what his title was, but I worked with Hines. Great guy. He is a guy I would love to see Florida State consider for the wide receiver coach. Now, I've got a couple of guys I'd like to see, but Hines, he played at Georgia. He's got an NFL name, an NFL background. He was a great athlete at Georgia. When I was a GA at South Carolina, we played against him. He played quarterback, running back, and wide receiver in one of the games we had against Georgia. But he's a great dude. He has instant credibility with the players because of his resume. He's got a connection, 6 degrees of separation from Mike because he's coaching for Kenny Dillingham at Arizona State, who was FSU's offensive coordinator. So I would just my experience with Hines was so positive, and football is so important to that guy. And he doesn't come across as a future Pro Football Hall of Famer, which I think he might be at some point. I think he might be in the Hall of Fame at some point. But he is a guy that lives for football. Great stand-up dude. In my experience working with him for the one season that the Alliance of American Football existed. But that would be a name if I was Mike Norvell. I'd be trying to steal from Kenny Dillingham because. But anyways,
you must have seen his press conference about it too. Did you see Dilly's? He was asked about Hines at his Monday press conference.
No, I saw
the reviews were glowing.
Yeah, I saw where he was. I saw the tweet where he says he's talking about Hines, but I did not listen to anything Kenny has to say because. Be quite honest with you.
He's like, well, apart from 100 touchdowns and 10,000 receiving yards and all these other accolades, he's a pretty good guy. So, I mean,
that's
what you said.
That would be a great candidate for wide receiver coach. And I need to see if I've still got Hines's phone number. I used to have it. I don't know if I do anymore. I helped him out with something that could have. He definitely owes me a phone call. I do know that. But anyway, that would be a great one. And then, of course, the last update we got, I think, is the FSU did receive a commitment over the weekend. It kind of got, or 2 commitments actually, it got glossed over in the craziness that was the firings on Sunday. But on Sunday morning, defensive end prospects Mandrell Desir and Darryll Desir, they're twin brothers. They had decommitted from Central Florida on Friday night, and as soon as they decommitted, John Garcia Jr., who's a national recruiting house for Rivals, put in a prediction for both those guys to flip to Florida State, which of course they have. And so you got 2 defensive ends committed. Now, I will say this, and Nick, I don't know if you've had a chance to go look at the film. Only one of them is a defensive end, Darryl, and he's the better of the 2 prospects. And Mandrell is definitely headed. He plays defensive tackle in high school, and he's already 6'3", 250. I think he will be a defensive tackle at Florida State. I don't know what he's being told, but I know what he is based off film. So you've got a defensive tackle and a defensive end that's signed. Mandrell does do what they do at Florida State. They play kind of a heavy read technique in high school. I think he's more of a disruptor, but Darryll certainly to me is more of a strong side defensive end than he is. He's more of an edge setter to me than he is a pass rusher. So I think he's more of a strong side defensive end type. So you did get some good news, and listen, both those guys seem locked in because they said, well, I'll paraphrase what they said. Well, they were for whatever makes the program better was essentially their
message,
their reaction. Yeah, when all these coaching changes were made. Nick, did anybody else, any of the other commits, have anything to say that kind of caught your attention or made you feel like they were either just as solid as they were before, or just maybe on shaky ground?
Well, I think the big news is the ones that we already covered earlier in the show, Pat, is obviously the 4 offensive linemen that are obviously clearly disappointed that their position coach is now no longer with the program. But pretty much every single other person that I talked to, both 2025 and 2026, seemed to be okay. Chase Lofton didn't want to comment, which is obviously understandable because I think his ties are more closely related to Chris Thompson and what ends up happening with him. And of course, he's going on other visits. Texas A&M is becoming a real player in this one. And obviously he's expected back at Florida State for the Florida game on November 30th. But, with all the 2026s, they were essentially like, it's kind of shocking, but you could tell that changes were coming. I'm still sticking with Norvell. A lot of trust in Norvell comments from both Darryl Bell to Darius Hughes, some of the 2026 guys from South Florida. Brady Smeagol said something similar. It's like, I trust in Norvell's vision. So essentially all of your 2026 guys, nobody seems to be too rattled by this. And seems like pretty much everybody else on the 2025 side of things. Zay Thomas said, it's tough, but things needed to change. So it seems, apart from, the offensive lineman, it seems like everybody is kind of taking it and understanding that these are things that probably could have or were going to happen with a 1-9 season.
Yeah.
So, that's kind of about where we stand right now. I don't feel particularly rattled by anybody's comments, apart from the guys that we already know about. And obviously with some of these other guys, especially with guys that are kind of out of state that are in the 2025 class, guys like Wynn, guys like Lofton, who Wynn may have been in Atkins's recruiting area, but obviously these guys are not in the area that would have been directly recruited by them. So that their ties to the program line more with their specific position coach is basically what I'm getting at here. So, but no, I think the reaction was, generally speaking, understanding, especially from your prospects from the next class, which is much higher ranked than this one is.
Yeah, well, it's going to be an interesting run to December 4th and see how Florida State's able to hold on to these 13 commitments. It'll be hard, but because they got some, as we've talked about, Kevin Wynn still highly sought after, Solomon Thomas. I fully expect Gregory Thomas to be here, but I know Notre Dame is making a big push for him. So we'll see what happens, but we will be back next Tuesday with another recruiting edition of the Osceola Seminole Sidelines. I know we've got coming up later this week. I think I am going to take my usual Thursday show and give that to Kurt, who's going to have FSU baseball coach Link Jarrett on for a little bit of a conversation. If Kurt does not, if he pushes that to Friday, I make him on just to talk about football in general and see if we've heard any updates on the coaching staff or any recruiting updates, or maybe just group therapy, as we've started calling these things. But if you're not a subscriber to the Osceola, please go to theosceola.com or floridastate.rivals.com. We've got our hot board for who could be FSU's next offensive coordinator. Got some names that will be obvious to you, some others that won't. We've also got the hot board for the defensive coordinator spot. We've also got the article on what Mike Norvell wants to see from Randy Shannon over 2 weeks, his message to recruits. Nick wrote a great article yesterday on what Mike Norvell wants recruits to be aware of about the program and what they need to know, and that he's been in constant contact with these guys. And obviously, as Nick mentioned, we've got Fish Bits, which Charles Fishbein, another one of our recruiting analysts, the guru of recruiting for the Osceola, actually has got some updated information on some players at the junior college level that could be on Florida State's radar. So you can go check that out, and some other recruiting news updates on Cortez Mills, Max Buchanan, among others, Javon Boggs, Tavion Swint. So some big names he's got some updates on. So please go to theosceola.com or floridastate.rivals.com and check that out. And obviously, if you're not a subscriber to the Osceola YouTube channel, please hit subscribe before you leave us today, whether you're watching live or taped, and then obviously hit the notification button so that you get notified when we're coming to you live or taped. And our live shows are every Monday night at 6 p.m., Tuesday, Thursdays at 3, and then we'll do post-game shows, or have been. I don't know if we'll do one after Charleston Southern. I don't know if anybody cares about that one. But
if we are doing a post-game show after Charleston Southern, I think things have gone probably terribly wrong in that game, there's a whole nother can of worms that are going to get opened up. So,
but tentatively we'll be here about 4:30 on not this Saturday, but next Saturday, and then obviously we will do a post-game show after Florida, and but we usually do those 10 or 15 minutes after the game ends. But we want to thank everybody for joining us. Nick, thanks for coming on, sharing what you've learned over the last couple of weeks on the recruiting trail, and we'll see you guys on Thursday. But please go to theosceola.com to check all our coverage of Florida State football, basketball, baseball, softball. All the sports are going on right now, so go check us out, and we appreciate it.